Welcome to Forum 360 on Fusion, your PBS channel. Thank you for joining us on our global outlook with a local view. This is Leslie Ungar, your host today. Today we're going to look at candidates, citizens, elections, and elected officials from a different perspective. We're going to look at running for office from the inside out rather than the outside in. Did you ever wonder what professions elected officials come from? The most common profession among members of Congress is that of public servant. Yet our founding fathers came from a variety of professions. Thomas Jefferson was a hemp farmer, Benjamin Franklin was a printer, and James Monroe was a cabinet maker. Would you ever think about running for office? I wouldn't, yet our guest today is finishing her first run for Congress. A mother of three, healthcare professional for 3 decades, an engaged volunteer, but not a career politician. One day, Susan Moran Palmer, our guest today, decided that Washington was broken and she could use her experience and expertise to help fix it. So she strapped on her big girl pants and entered a whole new world. Debates, door-to-door, donor calls, immersing herself in every issue from guns to Wall Street. In the recent primary, Susan was a candidate for the 16th district. Welcome.
Thank you, Leslie.
And thank you for doing your part in the democratic process. As we tape this show, we don't know the outcome of the primary. So we are talking about the process of going from citizen to candidate, not about the election results. Okay?
All right.
Let's start with a timeline. The primary is in May 2018, May 8th, 2018. Take us back to when you decided to become a candidate for Congress. What month was it? And take us back to your thought process for deciding to become a candidate.
It was in November. It was between Thanksgiving and Christmas. And my husband and I are split parties. He's a registered Republican and I'm a registered Democrat. And neither one of us were a President Trump supporter. And as it had evolved in his first year of the presidency, we were both pretty appalled at the discussions in our country, the way we were going. And in November, we both decided to look to see who our choices were going to be for Congress. At that point, Mr. Renacci was running for governor and already announced he wasn't going to run for Congress. So we knew we were going to have a new congressperson, and who were our choices. And as we looked, we found both Republican candidates unacceptable because they had not lived in the district. They both moved into the district to run for Congress. And for Jeff and I, that was a deal breaker right there. And on the Democratic side, there was 3 grassroots candidates with no professional campaigns, and together they had raised $4,000 in about a year. So although lots of heart and lots of drive, and that's fantastic, it's not a realistic perspective at this point when you run for Congress on a few $1,000s. It's just not possible.
So let's go to the thought process. How do you make that jump to go from working mom to candidate?
We had the family discussion, husband and all the kids, to discuss it. My boys are all teenagers. I'm not with small infants and trying to deal with that. Not that that should discourage any women. It's just a juggle. And as we looked into the process, we had made a determination to self-fund so that I could get out and meet as many voters as possible. Because again, we are talking now in the December-January timeframe, and you're only 4 or 5 months in to get to meet 700,000 voters or some kind of name recognition with your voters. So we opted to self-fund at that point. So it was a commitment not just of time, family commitment time, as well as professional time, because I worked full-time, as well as campaign. So it was usually a 12, 14-hour day end to end from January all the way through May.
So what does someone do? Let's say you decide, okay, so I'm going to run for Congress, but just from a legal standpoint and a paperwork standpoint, what do you have to do? Most of us will probably never run for something, so we don't know. What do you have to do? And in that question, what is it that sometimes you hear about people doing something wrong? So what is it that you have to do?
Well, the Federal Election Commission, FEC, requires certain paperwork to be turned in. They also require, because of the Stock Act, which was a congressional bill passed that requires you to disclose all your financial holdings, stocks, everything. So both of those have to be filed. So I chose to hire a campaign manager and a finance director to handle all that paperwork. So on top of a finance manager, a campaign director, you have a compliance director that you hire that represents a lot of people.
So, okay, so let's stop right there. So how do you, as someone who's never been involved as a candidate, how do you know where to go to hire someone, and how do you know if you're hiring a, quote, good person?
Well, I reached out to Michael Wager, who had run for Congress on the east side of town, who is a family friend through my husband's business. And I reached out to Michael, told him my intentions, and we sat down and had a 3 or 4 hour meeting where we discussed how do you roll it out, who do you hire, how do you determine it's a good fit for you.
And so you got some advice, and then that
he made some recommendations. But again, when you're coming in that late, a lot of people are already taken. So thankfully, the people he had used were both available.
Now, how do you go about forming a stand? Like, okay, I have a lot of opinions on things, but I probably don't have a well-educated opinion on the 100 issues. You know, we all know about, you know, gun control or abortion, but there's so many issues. How do you go about learning about so many different issues?
Well, I think all politics is local. I truly do believe that. So I think not all issues affect all areas of the country. So when you look at the district I'm looking at representing, you know, it's a large ag community in Wayne, so the tariffs and the NAFTA negotiations are really, really concerning to a lot of that constituency. So getting up and running on ag, and I grew up in Canfield, so ag was something I grew up in with Mahoning County, and just getting back up to speed on that was very important. And for me, my specialty are healthcare. And with 3 teenage sons, the gun violence epidemic in this country is very concerning. So for me, those were my 3 main issues as I moved into the campaign.
So what do you do when someone, you know, you're going door to door, or you're in debates that we're going to talk about, and they ask you about something that, you know, you may not be able, which I don't even know if any congressperson or senator that's sitting can know everything, but they ask you about something that, you know, you may not know a lot about. What do you do?
I've had it happen. Certainly, I'm pretty well informed in general as a voter, so I can usually hold my own. But I did have a young lady talk about the changes in the state funding for people with disabilities. And she's got a 21-year-old daughter with disabilities, and the state was really giving her a runaround on trying to get funding for residential care. So we got into an in-depth conversation, and I told her, educate me. You know, I don't have enough information. I need more information. And as a mother of a disabled child, she had all the information.
Now, what do you do about foreign affair issues that, again, you know, as a working mom and as all the balls that, you know, you're juggling at the same time on a day-to-day, probably something that happens in, you know, Afghanistan or in Israel or in Russia or Crimea or wherever, you know, it is probably not on the top of your list. So then what happens about foreign policy issues?
Well, and again, it's all about perspective and your experience. So the last 2 companies I worked for were startups, so I did travel Europe and Canada quite a bit, introducing new medical products in different areas. So you do end up having to learn about the different areas you're in to appropriately react and act in those countries. And I had, at the time, 2 nephews on active duty. Now I have 1 veteran nephew, but 1 still in. And as a family from serving in the military, we keep very abreast of Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria because we have family in the fight.
So, you know, let me ask you, I said in the introduction, and you say, you know, on your website, Washington is broken and you can help fix it. How?
I think we have to go back to civil conversations. Most of America is middle of the road. I'm talking the majority, 60, 65% are middle of the road right down. And then you have the extreme on both sides. I think with the way the country has been gerrymandered, right now the extremes are winning on both ends. It's not helping us move forward. We take 1 step forward and 2 steps back consistently over and over again, not solving problems and simply creating more. So I think someone who is moderate, straight down the middle, and is willing to compromise. I don't think that's a dirty word, I just don't. And I think as we address the gerrymandering in Ohio and other states do, I think it's going to improve. I think we need to be patient, and I think we need to be civil, and I think we need to be team-oriented.
From your life experiences, whether it's your 30 years in healthcare or as a mom or as a volunteer or as a wife or whatever, what do you think prepares you most to be a member of Congress?
You know, and again, it's perspective. So for me, it's about taking care of people, whether professionally as a healthcare provider or as a board member of a nonprofit, or as I work for companies trying to bring in new technologies that help Americans. It's the same thing, right? I'm taking care of my community. And for me, that has never changed. I don't see that as much in Congress, that their focus is taking care of their constituents. Sometimes it's, you know, moving a political party forward or given ideology, but I don't see it as much about caring for their constituents, and that's absolutely my focus.
So would that may bridge to my next question, you know, why run for Congress when with, you know, I would say historically low numbers, but they've been so low for so long that I'm not sure it's historically low numbers. Why do you want to be a member of a seemingly unpopular group?
Well, nowhere to go but up, right?
Pretty much, yes.
One of my eldest sons, he's almost 17, and one of his buddies said, we need a Congress mom to change the tenure and the way people act and talk in Congress.
Now, you are roughly 4.5 months in, 5 months in or something.
Yes.
Is there one thing or a couple of things that has surprised you most about this process of running for office?
Surprisingly, I have found the voters to be fantastic.
Well, that's encouraging.
Both Democrat and Republican, because, you know, obviously I'm canvassing Democrats for the primary, but when I'm out and about at different events, it's a mixed crowd, and majority of people have been polite, kind, questions, answers, whether they support me or don't support me, they've been great. Surprising-wise, I don't find myself, the Democratic Party, that encouraging of women candidates, in my experience.
So that kind of leads to my next question was going to be, what on the campaign trail has disappointed you?
You know, it's a 6-way primary, so the Ohio Democratic Party is trying to stay out, but you have a lot of women's caucuses who are choosing not to back the only female candidate in the race, and women don't get out of primaries. That's why we don't have more women in elective office, municipal, state, federal, because they never get out of the primaries. So I think it's more important now than ever for the women's caucuses to step up.
What do you tell your kids when, you know, if you can't be there for, you know, dinner or, you know, for a soccer game or something or other, you know, what do you tell your kids that why you can't be there for their recital or their play or whatever?
Well, again, we had the conversation ahead of time, so the kids knew. And for us, as I told them why I was running, you know, you guys are almost full grown. I've committed a fair amount of my adult life raising you and committing to my companies, and now I need to turn and help everybody else around us.
And they understand that?
They do. The youngest, probably more difficult for him. He's in that middle school age where it's all about them. But my older two are very, very proud of me.
Well, that's nice. Anytime you hear it, the kids are proud of their mom. The mom that we're talking to today is Susan Moran Palmer. She is a candidate for Congress, and as we tape this show, we don't know the results of the primary. Today we are looking at the inside of a campaign and what it's like to be a candidate. You mentioned a couple issues, you know, healthcare and guns. If you had to pick one issue that's most important to you, what would that be?
I think the gun violence in the United States is a public health crisis. I don't want to, it can't just be wrapped around constitutional rights. We lose 38,000 Americans a year to gun deaths, and that is a fair amount of it is absolutely preventable with the right policies in place.
So if your magic wand worked,
yes,
and let's say the first day that you're in Congress, you could do whatever you wanted to and get total buy-in, what would one thing that you would do be?
Again, for gun safety, unfortunately, the federal government's not allowed to collect the data, so I have to depend on groups like Moms Demand Action or Every Town for Gun Safety to get some. We have to be evidence-based with this, right? Just like medicine. You need to be evidence-based before you come up with policy. So for that, universal background checks, red flag laws, and then giving alcohol, tobacco, and firearm the ability to rate weapons and accessories and ammunition as to whether it's prohibited, restricted, or available for sale. Just those 3 changes could make a big difference in the gun violence in this country.
Now, as a communication coach, I'm kind of interested in what it's like being in a debate when you are sitting right next to your opponents. You know, when we see a presidential debate on television, it's just, you have just two opponents and they're kind of facing each other. But when you're debating with 5 other candidates, you are sitting right next to your opponents that you know you're going to see either the next night or the next week or wherever.
Sure.
You're going to see at another debate. What is that like?
This particular primary hasn't been very combative. I don't see a lot of people attacking each other within the Democratic Party. The vast majority of things, the larger issues, we tend to agree on. Just everybody has their things that are more important to them than the other. So I have not had any issues with the gentleman I'm running against. It has not been a lot of elbow throwing at this point.
Well, that's good.
Yes.
And to someone out there that's thinking about running, that it can be that way, I would think would be encouraging.
Well, and I grew up in Youngstown, so there's not too many elbows you could throw that I can't handle.
Now, tell us what it's like to sit in front of an editorial board at a newspaper while they interview you, and then you know that an endorsement, whatever value it has in today's world, I'm honestly not sure, but whatever value it has, you know that that endorsement of that paper is going to be based largely on that interview. What is that like? Strangers are interviewing you and coming up with a decision.
The hardest thing about the paper endorsement was with so many candidates, they're very limited on how much you actually talk. Because with 6 people and then a certain amount of time for the questions, you end up getting 3 to 4 minutes of speaking time.
So that's the same kind of thing, they interview you all at the same time?
Yes.
Wow.
And that's their format. And I'm not sure when you get these massive crowds in a primary, if that's the best format to actually have a conversation with people.
But that's the format that you had anytime you spoke?
Yes.
Are there some lessons that you've learned that you're going to be able to apply outside of your life as a candidate?
Certainly communication style, how better we assume people know what you know when you speak. And that's like the worst habit you could ever have when you're in politics, because people don't have the same background you have. So learning to go back to the very beginning and bringing a subject forward has definitely something that I've learned to do in the last few months.
Now, many candidates, you know, running for all offices face the same challenge, donors, okay? So the first challenge with donors is that it seems that a lot of them would say before a primary, well, you know, I'll wait and see, you know, who makes it out of the primary, and then I'll support you. But then how do you get out of the primary if you don't get money? So how do you deal with that challenge from prospective donors?
Well, it's such an odd system in how you raise money. It's a database based on voters, and the giving community tends to be quite older, you know, 65 or above. And then the donor base for the younger group is kind of hard to get to them. They're kind of used to pressing on their phone to do things versus email or things like that. So the database management for politics could use a sales force. They could use some definite technological advances that they don't currently have. So I've reached out a lot on a personal level for most of my donors, working my relationships, my family, to bring about people who already know me in such a short time period. But
what is that like to go to someone that you know? I think in some ways it has to be even harder. Let's say, you know, you saw them at Thanksgiving or something or other, and then you have to call them and ask for money. What is that like?
It is. In the beginning, it's definitely more difficult talking to your own friends and family versus talking to a stranger. But you already have the relationship. It's really hard to get a relationship in 3 months to a point where people are comfortable giving you money. You have institutional donors that support Democrats, but again, with the 6-way primary, you need somebody who already knows you. So I found it much more helpful and productive to go with the relationships first. And then I've started to develop relationships with donors now that I've spoken to 4, 5, 6 times that are now contributing towards the tail end of the campaign.
Is there something that either they ask of you or something that you can promise? I don't mean like that you can promise a vote or something, but I mean, aside from like, I'll work hard, like what can you offer them when you ask for money?
Honestly, people just want a normal conversation. They don't want to hear your stump speech. They don't want to hear politics as usual. They very much want to delve into a conversation. So I usually open it up to, you know, here's my focus. How does that affect your life? And what do you think of my ideas, so that we can move the conversation forward? And some people, you know, we aren't on the same page, whether it's on gun violence or something else.
So I imagine that you have collected hundreds of memories.
Yes.
Can you share with us one or two of your favorite memories from your first, whatever happens from now on, you won't have another first run. This will be your first one always. One or two memories that you've collected from your first run in politics.
My first event was Medina's Young Democrats, the student group in Medina school systems. They hosted their first forum. I believe they live streamed it, so it was my first time out with the whole group. A little nerve-wracking. I wasn't sure how well I did. It was my first time out, just getting my feet down and doing it, and I was a little concerned. And I got a lovely email on my Facebook page, a post from a gentleman who was there, and he said, I want you to keep talking about farms and how hard it's been on us. He said, nobody else talked about that but you. He said, and it resonates, and you need to keep doing it. You're a fantastic candidate. And it was the ego boost, the confidence boost I needed right then. He made all the difference in the world for me.
You were at the Medina Square?
Yes.
When they had a protest?
The March for Our Lives, yes. Correct.
March for Our Lives. And you took one of your sons?
My oldest, yes. Jeremy was with me.
Now, is that something that you would have done before you were a candidate?
I hesitated, and again, my husband and I discussed this. We would certainly have done the march prior to it. We were concerned about me taking one of the kids to a March for Our Lives. As a candidate in our current climate, I don't want to put any of our children at risk. So I did take Jeremy with me to that one.
And what was that like through his eyes? Or let me ask first, what was that like for you to see it through a march through his eyes?
He was happy to come. It's something he feels strongly about as a student. I mean, they've been doing lockdown drills for 8 years. I mean, it's nuts. He's been doing it a long time. We did have a gentleman show up with an assault rifle at the march. Terrified the children. There's a lot of moms with strollers there. It was, unfortunately, an awful example, and he was offended that the man came. But it was a good example for him to engage. You can't just sit back and look at it on your phone or on TV. You need to step in and get engaged. So,
in the remaining minutes, I'm going to ask you for shorter answers, not necessarily one or two words, but shorter answers. I'm going to ask you for a funny moment from the campaign. I worked with a female school superintendent one time that the day that she was being, sworn in or whatever, she had gone to work out early and she forgot her bra. And she had to call her husband and tell him to bring her a bra, okay, which I thought was kind of a funny moment. So is there a funny moment from the campaign?
Funny.
Something that makes you laugh, your campaign, your kids, your staffers, someone when you knocked on their door.
Stupid things. I had the wrong color socks on one day, and it distracted me more than it distracted anybody else. And my campaign manager is waving at me to stop worrying about the socks. But that's the only thing that comes to mind at the top.
I used to have a friend that did TV in Cleveland, and one time she put on 2 shoes, but they weren't matching shoes. And my dad saw that on TV, and he used to call her Linda Two Shoes because they didn't match. So it can be just about anything. Until Dan Horrigan ran for mayor, every candidate that I knew seemed to eat their way through campaign season, and he actually lost weight while he was running. But what's a favorite food? Like, is there food at every time you go somewhere? Is there food? I mean, if you go to, say, a pancake breakfast, and then you go to a lunch, and then you go to a chicken dinner, and then you go someplace else. I mean, is there food everywhere? And what's one of your favorite foods?
Well, I'm with Dan. I was the opposite of, I have had the colleagues that I'm working with now, that I'm running against now, that had gained weight. I was the total opposite. It wasn't so much the stress, I just don't like to eat and then speak. So I would just cut out dinner almost every night. So it's been the opposite for me. I've lost a fair amount of weight.
Any favorite food? Wait till summer with the fair season.
Yes, nothing special this time. It's just, grilled chicken has been probably the most normal thing we've had.
A sad moment from the campaign?
I've had several with people, especially with my healthcare background. People coming up and talking about losing a relative to opioid addiction. Another woman talking about her niece having breast cancer and not being able to get care prior to the ACA, and how much the Affordable Care Act means to her family.
Is there something that you learned that surprised you?
Surprised me. I found that particular March for Our Lives in Medina, that when the gentleman showed up with the assault rifle, how no one was surprised. They were shocked, but the police officers there weren't remotely surprised. And I think uncivilized behavior has become accepted in our culture, and we as the majority need to push back on that.
When I was in grad school, a friend of mine was in law school, and she used to answer the, why did you go to law school? She used to say, because I like saying I'm in law school. What's it like saying I'm running for Congress?
I get a lot of encouragement from people when I say I'm running for Congress, especially from women. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for stepping up. And I have found that very compelling, very inspiring for me to continue to run as hard as I can.
And really, whatever happens, that won't change the fact that you did run for Congress, that you were a candidate. And again, we thank you for being in that democratic process. Today, there are twice as many lawyers and business people as any other profession in Congress. There used to be more teachers and farmers and printers and just ordinary citizens. Our guest today, Susan Moran Palmer, is a citizen who decided to become a candidate for this election. She shared some of her campaign stories with us today, what it's like to debate your opponent, sit for a newspaper endorsement, knock on strangers' doors to ask for their vote, and call prospective donors for money. Our guest today embodies what the founders had in mind for citizen representation. This is Leslie Ungar. Thank you for joining us on Forum 360 for our global outlook with a local view. And whenever there's a next election, they need to vote.
Absolutely.
Thank you for joining us.
Forum 360 is brought to you by Electrical Impulse Communications, the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, Hudson Community Television, the Rubber City Radio Group, an anonymous donor, the Jewish Community Board of Akron, Medical Mutual of Ohio, Blue Green, and Forum 360 supporters.